So how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. That was a little bit weak from you all, I think. It's been a long morning? Yes? Good information? Yeah? Okay. Well, we're going to try to continue that trend. I think the only way that's going to continue well is if you help me out. So you don't want to hear me talk at you for an hour. That's not going to work out well for me or for you. So let's make this interactive from the beginning. Kim mentioned that. The folks that are online, certainly you can send your questions in. As Kim mentioned, Lorenzo will take the microphone around to folks that have questions or comments. So just before we get into like nuts and bolts here, Kim mentioned I did fly in. She had reached out to me to speak at the Baltimore event, and it didn't work with my schedule. So why would I fly to Des Moines? I've never been to Des Moines. So I've actually kept a list of the states I've been to in the U.S. for work business over the 25 years I've been there. And so I hadn't been to Iowa. Now I can check Iowa off the list. There's only 6 to go, and I've been in all 50. And you can guess which 6 I haven't been to or ask me afterwards. But it's a lovely city. I spent some time in LA last week. LA's dirty and nasty. This is a beautiful city. Do what you can to keep it that way. And the other, I probably shouldn't say this, the other thing that I appreciate is you can walk up and down the street, at least I did, and you don't smell weed everywhere. That's in most U.S. cities, that's a thing. So congratulations on that too. You've heard about me. The one thing that Kim didn't mention, and not that this is about me, but I also lead the Information Sharing and Analysis Center for the natural gas industry. We call it the DNG ISAC. Why is this? That must be me, sorry. So the natural gas ISAC is a means to send threat information that we get from various sources to natural gas companies. So I've been doing that for the last 7 or 8 years, and that's kept me right in the vortex of cybersecurity. And also physical security, because our industry has a significant presence physically as well. So let's talk not just about me. As you know, I work in the energy industry. Are there any other folks here that are in energy, either electric or gas? Hands? Anybody? Nobody? Honestly, no one else in the electric industry or energy industry? Okay, we've got a couple feet. Okay. How about financial services? Yes, there you go. All right. Communications? Telecom? Right, you got to put your hand up. Yeah, that, please. Yeah. All right. So how about water industry?
I service people in the water industry.
And doing what?
Cyber risk control.
So you must be a practitioner or a service provider. So other service providers that are in here now? Yes. So great. Thank you for serving the cybersecurity space in many industries. Well, I think that what we have to talk about today will cover not just the energy space, but other spaces as well. I thought that to do just maybe we'll call it level setting or a little bit of background. I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about cybersecurity in general. If this goes over your heads, you can run the stage and knock me off, or you could just tell me to speed up. But we'll talk about a few just basic cyber things. I'll give you some background about the natural gas industry and what we have done over the last probably 10 to 12 years. And then at the end, we will do a call to action. I have some thoughts on what we can all be doing together to better improve cybersecurity. I think one of the reasons why we're here today is we don't want to see our nation's critical infrastructure stopped by threat actors. So it's a battle that we face on a day-by-day basis. All right. So questions for you. Can anyone tell me any industry or organization or company that is not impacted or has not been impacted by cyber? I can't think of one. If anyone can think of one, you get a prize to be named later. And I would even boil that down to not just industries, but it affects every person. Every person, every family member is susceptible to cyber attack, whether it could be ransomware, it could be any number of things. So would anyone be able to take a stab at what the cost is going to be annually for cybersecurity response? I've got a statistic for 2025. Any takers on what that number might be?
500 billion.
That's a good number. I got 500 billion.
6 trillion.
That's closer to the number I have. 6 trillion. So the number that I saw was 10.5 trillion in 2025. So that's another reason why we're here. For that type of cost, we're trying to mitigate against having to spend that kind of money, and every effort we put into it either holds it or reduces it. I think some of the things that make cybersecurity really challenging are the number of threat actors and the number of threats. And the threats have gotten worse and more complicated over the years. So we'll talk a little bit about both of those things. So again, I am sure that I am preaching to the choir by covering this with you all. Some of these cyber threats are common. You've seen the names. I think if I was going to draw attention to anything on here, it would be, in my opinion, the thing that makes cyber threats as challenging as they are is the social engineering concept. So most of the threats that are effective are things that some person unknowingly does that they shouldn't do. And why do they do that? Because they've seen something either on the internet, on their phone, in their inbox that looks interesting or looks like they need to help or it's going to benefit them. And that's really the basis for all social engineering. What can I do using human psychology to get you to do something that either you don't want to do or something that's going to benefit me? And that's what we've seen that has created really a lot of the background to this. So it plays itself out in phishing, all the types of different phishing that there are. And also, that's really the core for the entry point to ransomware. Questions, comments, thoughts? Comments on any of these items? All right. Now, I know you're talking. Before Kim introduced me, you're all talking to each other. So don't stop. So let's just take a minute about cyber threat actors. Some of these are more common or more interesting than others, but they've all played a significant role in why we're sitting here today. There's always an insider threat, and these days you look at things that are as simple as you have someone who's been a system administrator for a number of years. They've had 2 years where they could work from home. And now you tell them they got to come back to the office. So, thank you. Maybe they don't want to come back to the office, and so maybe they decide to do something from the inside that's going to damage the systems that could cause your attention, or worse. Or you have thrill seekers like teenagers predominantly, or hacktivists. Probably the best known hacktivist group would be, yes, thank you, Anonymous. Criminals, personally, I would put anything in the ransomware category as cyber criminals. You could argue that with me. I'm not here to win arguments, but anyone who's asking for money, as far as I'm concerned, is a criminal. And then terrorists and nation states are typically I'd put them in the same category. And we'll see a little bit where nation states come from. We've been trained to look at places like Russia and China, and there are others. And it's not just to terrorize us, but it's also to gain our intellectual property and other reasons. On this list, we've got a number of costs associated with cyber attack. Any thoughts on which of these, and I don't have an answer to this, so I'm looking for your intelligence here. What's the worst? What's the highest cost in this list? And take cyber insurance off the list. We'll talk about that in a second. But the upper items on the list, What should be the highest costs associated with cyber attack?
Reputational damage, depending on the size of it.
Loss of life.
That is very solid. I did not include that loss of life. Yeah, and that has been reported for sure. I think depending on the nature of the particular attack, any of these could be significant, and they all need to be watched out for. I have cyber insurance at the bottom, so there is an extent to which cyber insurance can help us prepare for costs associated with cyber attacks. I think the big challenge with cyber insurance is, what have you insured yourself for? What does your policy say? What triggers you to be able to have cost recovery? And did I see a hand? No. A lot depends on what's in your policy. So if you are pursuing cyber insurance, I would make sure you know what's in the policy and what triggers the policy. All right, so that's just some background information. Thank you for walking through that with me. I wanted to talk a little bit also, as Kim mentioned, about the natural gas industry, which is where I've worked specifically on this for a number of years. As Chief Information Officer, I've had the opportunity to work with natural gas companies throughout the United States and also in Canada. I've visited a number to talk about their cyber threats. I've met with their some boards of directors at times. So I've got a fair amount of exposure to this. Back in 2010, 11, 12, there were some major cyber issues that impacted some companies in the Middle East in the natural gas space. And that was really the impetus for the US-based natural gas industry to engage very specifically on cyber. And from that time until today, it's been quite focused on cyber. When we reached the point of being able to, I don't want to use the word convince, but help the CEOs of industry understand that this was a real significant issue, they came together and developed a commitment to cyber and physical security. For anyone who's looking at this, it's not intended for you to read. You can get the slides later if you want to read this. If you can see the titles on top of the colored boxes, you can tell there's probably it mirrors the NIST framework. And so this wasn't inked until after that was developed, but the lead up to this happened from 2012 through 2015 or 16. So what do we do at AGA? We are faced with some policies and some things leading into regulation. We'll talk a little bit more about the TSA later on in the conversation. Historically, there have been TSA guidelines that our industry must follow, and there are folks from TSA that will go out into the field and check that we are adhering to those guidelines, and then provide reports on things that are missed. We helped to develop those guidelines, and they were effective to some extent. Realizing that they may be coming to an end, we helped the folks at the American Petroleum Institute develop a standard which we were hoping future cybersecurity regulation or guidelines would be based on, but we haven't quite gotten that far yet. One way that we interact with government is that we meet quarterly with representatives from DHS and DOE, Homeland Security and Energy, on cybersecurity. And that's called the Natural Gas Sector Coordinating Council. And it's a group of folks from industry, from the industry trade associations and government that gather and talk about projects we want to do together and initiatives that are going to help move things forward for the industry. So questions, comments before I go ahead? I'll keep going. some of the things that we as an organization have done with our members, we have a committee. The security committee has been in place for a number of years. It actually predates the flurry of activity that's occurred in the last 10 to 12 years. And its focus, if you go back 15 or 20 years, was more on physical security, and it's transitioned to more to cybersecurity, and still a physical component. And as you know, there are plenty of organizations and people that are not enamored with natural gas as an energy source, and they do things like attack pipelines in person. So there's physical security risks in addition to cybersecurity risks. So the Security Committee and the Cyber Task Force work together. That's representatives from industry to bring best practices to their colleagues. We also have a cybermetrics program where people can compare certain data points from their company to others to see where they can do better and find out how to do better. We do a cyber peer review program where we will visit with companies throughout the U.S. and bring a tool with us from the Department of Energy to help evaluate where they are with their cybersecurity programs. We have done that effectively, usually in regional settings where 3 or 4 companies will come together and they'll talk about their cyber preparedness. And it's not just me talking to them who doesn't manage an energy infrastructure, but it's their peers talking to one another about what they're doing or not doing and offering best practices to help. And the tool that we use most with the peer cyber reviews is the Department of Energy's Cybersecurity Capability Maturity Model, which has hundreds of data points to collect on what your maturity is in different areas of cybersecurity.
Jim, just out of curiosity, do you aggregate all that data for people that do those self-assessments to be able to compare yourself against industry?
Let's let Loren, that's a good question. And Loren's going to come up with a microphone, and I'll ask you to ask it again. Don't change it.
It would be fun.
Well.
The question I asked was, do you aggregate all that data for all the different responders to be able to have, other industry peers be able to look once they've self-assessed and be able to assess against it?
So I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to dance around a little bit too. So on the surface of that, I'd like to say yes, because there seems like there'd be value in saying yes. But the answer is no. And the reason for that is there's just a lot of concern about if you keep and tally what people's responses are, if it gets into the wrong hands, that could create a real bad day real fast. So if I know where someone's weaknesses are, I know what to attack. We've wrestled with that for the last decade, and we've landed on not tracking it. I'll take it a step further and say the tool that we use is a Department of Energy tool, and they've asked us to track the information for them. And the last thing I'm going to do is take that information and give it to government, who I'm not sure they can protect their networks any better than we can. So we haven't done that. And that's a long-winded answer, but give you a little bit of background and some of the why. A couple more programs that I'd mentioned to you. We were confronted in a congressional hearing probably 6 or 7 years ago about cyber mutual assistance. The electric industry had begun a program, and some congressmen wanted to know why we didn't have a program. And within 24 to 48 hours, the electric industry was allowing us to participate in their program rather than starting another one. So we do participate with the electric industry's cyber mutual assistance program. I wouldn't say that's been heavily activated, but if you think of mutual assistance, often, most commonly, it's a physical thing. If there's a hurricane, people will drive from states where they were not impacted by the hurricane to places where they were and help out. Same concept here with cyber. Some more protections in place with non-disclosure agreements and such. And there have been a few instances where small amounts of requests or of assistance have been requested, but nothing of tremendous significance so far. There's, this is true not just for the energy industry, but the Department of Homeland Security, Idaho National Laboratory, has an industrial control system cybersecurity training program. There's multiple levels of this. Some of their trainings are available online, which a quick Google search would find for you. There's also a very engaging red team, blue team exercise that takes place in beautiful Idaho Falls. So if you want to go there, this training doesn't cost anything to participate in other than your travel expenses. And it's a week-long training class where you participate on a red team or a blue team to either attack or defend. In the experience I've had, that's one of the best exercises I've ever done. So I'll just leave it out there for you. In terms of exercises, we participate in the electric industry's GridX exercise, and actually today is the inaugural natural gas exercise that some of my colleagues are leading while I'm away. We do regular teleconferences with industry, and as I mentioned, there's the Downstream Natural Gas Information Sharing and Analysis Center. To give a little bit of flavor, more flavor of this, we collect sources from mostly government. So energy, Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, and others provide reports to us on a regular basis. Most of that comes through email. Some of it comes machine to machine, and we take that information and make it available to all of the gas companies that participate. Currently, participation in the ISAC includes all of the natural gas utility companies and pipeline companies in the US and in Canada. And it's a fairly tight network. There's over 600 participants, and they do at times share their own information into the system for people to see what threats they're gathering. I also gave several examples of different resources that have created as best practices from industry members, created by industry and for industry. So the one thing I wanted to also cover a little bit today was about the TSA, or Transportation Security Administration, and how that's impacted the natural gas industry. Before I get into this, I just want to say, if you've been to Vegas before, you've heard the phrase, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So, I'd like just to ask that anything we cover today on this slide stays amongst this audience, and if folks online, if you can help me just keep this to yourselves, I'd appreciate that also. Yes?
With your work in with Department of Homeland Security and all the other government departments, do you guys work with the CISA?
We do.
Yeah? How closely do you work with them? Do you they've got a huge list of security things that need, their security patches that need patched that for all the other governments. Do you guys follow that list, or
We do.
how do you work with them?
So a couple things I would say about CISA are the people there tend to change frequently. So most of what we interact with are emails that we get from them. We're alerted with every addition that's made to the resources that you just mentioned. So whether it's patches, there's the known exploit list that they have. There's a variety of tools that are available through CISA. We get all of those and we make them available to all the participants. And there, if there's opportunities for feedback, we'll go back and forth with them if there's something that's of interest. But we're very, very closely engaged with CISA, and we have been. Is there anyone that's not familiar with Colonial Pipeline and the incident that happened last spring? So let me say this. Last night I was in an establishment. Well, I was in a brewery in town, and I started to talk to the fellow sitting next to me at the bar. We traded a few stories, and I mentioned something about Colonial Pipeline to him, and he was unfamiliar. So I wasn't sure whether that was more of an East Coast thing, or I don't know. But if anyone was not in the nervous laugh category, Colonial Pipeline is a company that serves petroleum products predominantly on the East Coast. And roughly a year and a half ago, they had a ransomware attack on their business networks. And out of abundance of care, they shut down their operating networks as well, which caused some lack of product to flow on the East Coast, to the extent that there were people who were waiting for gas in certain markets. Prices went up, and when that happens, then Congress gets involved, and one thing leads to another. So, in any event, Colonial Pipeline happened. I won't get into more details than that. And then what you just heard is Jim's perspective. Other people would probably describe it differently, but being in the industry, that's how I would describe it. And almost immediately after that incident, TSA laid down 2 security directives towards the pipeline industry in the U.S. So natural gas companies would fall within the pipeline industry to a certain extent. It's energy, gas, oil, pipelines. We're all together in this. And the comments back from TSA were, well, we had to do this because the threats against your industry have been escalating to a point where we see no other reason than to require you to do certain things and certain security practices. And they said, the threats that we have are highly classified. We will try to get threat briefings out to you. Well, those threat briefings took 6 months to a year to happen. They were spotty at best, in my opinion. And although I would say that, from my knowledge, the threats have increased, and we mentioned that earlier today, over the last 10, 12 years, in my opinion, they haven't exponentially increased at that point in time. Personally, what I would have rather heard TSA say, well, because of Colonial Pipeline incident, we're doing this with the industry, which would have been a more accurate assessment, again, in my opinion. So we have the reality of that. After that happened and the security directives were released, TSA was willing and did begin to talk with industry participants over the course of probably close to a year. And they did take constructive feedback, believe it or not. And so they came out with a new security directive, I think it was last month or 2 months ago. And this is less prescriptive, and it's more geared towards just best practices. And of course, people often look at industry as wanting to have like the least impact. We do want to be safe too, but we want to be smart about how we're being safe. And not every detailed regulation fits best for every company. So where do we stand today? We do have security directives for the industry that must be followed. It's likely a precursor to regulation, and the regulator would likely be TSA. There's different folks in Washington who have suggested that the regulator move from TSA to other groups that may be more geared towards serving that purpose. I'm not sure if that'll happen or not. I think that would be a very difficult road legislatively to make happen. So, any thoughts or comments on this? I'll be happy to have anyone argue with me if they don't like the way I presented it.
Jim, we have a question from online.
Yes.
On the virtual platform from Larry, do IoT devices and OT systems get enough recognition as a threat vector?
Well, in my opinion, they do. They're included in some of these security directives. They have been addressed for years. So the question is IoT devices. Most critical infrastructure is full of Internet of Things, of devices that are connected to the internet, and making sure that they are well protected is quite important. So I would say yes to that. Any other comments? Another question?
I do have a question about the exercise that you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Could you provide more information on that?
I can. Probably the best way to do that is I believe that my contact information has been made available in the slides or the platform, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever. Anyone who wants more information about that or actually anything else, just reach out to me and I'd be happy to get it to you. All right. Any other controversy about TSA? I should have asked if there's anyone from TSA in the room. I don't think the answer is yes. All right. I've got a third section with this. This has more to do with what we can do, what you can do. I think that if we don't address what some action points for you would be, we really are not taking advantage of the time together. So the one thing I did was I pulled together from the NIST framework, and everyone's familiar with the NIST framework? Yes? That's really, you're all asleep now. Okay, that's fine. So let me ask this question. Were any of you involved in any of the development meetings for the NIST framework?
I'm willing to admit it.
Yeah, I'm willing to admit it. Anyone? Okay. Well, that was an interesting process. I'll just leave it at that. So there's 5 different sections to this, and I think that everyone in this room works in the cyber area. There's something here in this slide that you could take away and work on subsequent to today, whether it's improving the way that you categorize your assets, the identify section. You can't protect what you don't know about, and it's not just hardware, but it's also software and data. So knowing what you've got in your environment would be the starting point. And then putting prudent measures to protect what you have in place so that it is segmented off from the internet, and it has appropriate security controls and access controls for each part of it. And then after that, there's detection, and it's being able to know in your environment whether in fact you are seeing normal operations or there's something's happening that's not normal that you need to pay attention to. And then what are you going to do to respond if you see a problem? And all the steps that go into that. Then how to recover and bring yourself back to normal operations. I think that in here, there's something that any and every one of us can do. It's a continuous improvement process, and we all need to work hard at that. So I'm really at the end of the prepared comments that I've got for today. I think that what can we do to help make our nation's infrastructure stronger? Who can help me with what next steps can you all take? Questions, comments? Yes, we've got microphones coming.
Well, the best model I've seen for at least data protection has been a combination of isolation, immutability, and intelligence. And I really haven't heard an all-encompassing circle around that, because we have a lot of data and we have a lot of situations with ransomware, malware, systems that read that data that could be compromised. So those 3 I's, how is AGA dealing with those 3 I's?
That's a good question. One of the things that I'll mention this. There's a tool that was developed called Shodan that gives an opportunity for people to go on to the web and see if they can reach components of industrial control systems. So one of the parts of your question was, well, how do you keep these things separate from prying eyes? And I think one of the things that we found when this tool was first developed, and I don't have a date for that, but it's been a number of years, was that there were a number of industrial control devices that were openly accessible on the internet. And there's a degree to which that's true Today, if you use that tool, you'll find devices that you can get into. For us, we've worked with industry to have providers make sure that their devices are not discoverable. I think we made great strides with that, but it's an ongoing process because there's always new devices being added, and there's always devices being retired, and in the flux, there are things that can be exposed for some period of time. So I don't know if that's a full answer to your question, but that's at least answering a piece of your question. So other questions or comments?
I have another question from the virtual platform. This is again from Tracy. What is the industry doing to support gas companies in the effort to better understand all business critical operations and functions that would result in the loss of business? This is the missing piece for most organizations.
So I think what we've talked about is an attempt to cover that from a variety of perspectives. We have raised awareness at all levels of the organization. We have enabled peer reviews for folks to participate in, to evaluate, and we've brought folks together to share best practices. I think that adding those three things together, we've made a lot of progress. It's not perfect, but it's certainly progress. We have two up front, so if the trip up here is worth it.
Thank you. So, supply chain. I anticipate the gas industry has a huge supply chain, and it's a long chain. How do you maintain insight and transparency into the threats that are being brought to not only your systems, but the systems that run the physical devices in the gas pipelines that might be coming through the supply chain and third parties?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, it's funny, that actually came up yesterday. There's a group that approached us on supply chain threat. Their organization evaluates supply chain partners for companies and provides them with resources to address concerns that they find. This is not a completed project. I don't think it ever will be, for us or for any other industry for that matter. I mentioned, without speaking out of school here, I mentioned in our work that we review with folks, probably one of the weakest areas that we found was just dealing with supply chain or external dependencies that companies have. As time has progressed, there's been more and more things that have been moved out of one company's direct responsibility into someone else's, cloud computing enabling much of that. Today, if they wanted to, someone could put all of their pipeline controls in the cloud and have them controlled by somebody else. Whether that is a good idea or a bad idea, we'll leave over here. I'm not going to touch that. I have various thoughts on that. But at the end of the day, how much do we really know about the products or services that we're using, and how much access do we have to really know about them? If you buy any product that has control circuits in it and you open it, how do you know whether they're not beaconing back to some other country that you don't want them to beacon back to? Those are all good questions. I don't know that there's solid answers to every one of them, or any one of them.
A quick follow-up then related to that. Have you started using digital bill of materials or D-bombs or operational bombs, O-bombs, to help that transparency to be revealed?
That's a good question. I'll be perfectly honest with you. That's a concept I have not heard of up to this point. So maybe we can chat afterwards.
Definitely. You're on my panel this afternoon, so
Okay.
we could talk about it.
Good.
So my question was more around bug bounty as it relates to, physical infrastructure. Does AGA have something like that from an industry perspective where they open it up to, White Hat or others that want to help participate and secure the critical infrastructure?
Tell me more about more details of what you're asking.
Sure. So, you've got XYZ power company, let's just use Mid-American as an example, right? And they say, hey, we believe we're secure, right? We want to open this up, but they don't want to maybe, let's use someone smaller, right? Maybe a local shop that doesn't have a budget, right, to go out and hire a professional company. Does the AGA help support that or bring together groups of vetted individuals that can help, right, look to secure the infrastructure?
So if you're talking about pen testing in particular?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Red team activities, pen testing.
Right. So let me answer that a couple different ways. Many of the utility companies that we work with a lot are the largest ones in the U.S. Pen testing is a part of their budget on a regular basis. So let's rank, and AJ's got 200 member companies. Rank them from largest to smallest. Somewhere down the chain, you get to a point where I would say not only do they not have budget for pen testing, but they don't have a CISO. They have one person in the office that does IT and also cleans the coffee pot and does a few other things too. So when you, the consequence to those organizations is far less than to large organizations. I think that the ones that really need to pen test themselves I'm sure there's exceptions to that. And they haven't really needed a whole lot of immediate help from us. We wouldn't have any resources to do that directly. The smaller companies, what we have offered to them is to come and just do a review with them and see where their holes are. Many of them have taken us up on that, but they have limited resources to do anything with it. In some of the cases, like the smaller ones that I've described, I'm not sure how much real effort they need to put into that necessarily. Yes, they maybe are whacked by a ransomware attack, but if a company that serves 5,000 gas companies in a remote area has a ransomware attack, more than likely that company, based on that company's size, their control systems are probably not electronically controlled. From my experience, they're typically predominantly manual, and they wouldn't be directly impacted. So, long-winded answer, but yeah. Other questions or comments? So we're going to have this table be the only table that's really like engaging. All right. Okay, we've got, we won't forget about you.
Since the Colonial Pipeline incident, can you talk a little bit about like critical infrastructure and what are some of the new areas that they're working on to harden or protect their infrastructure?
Right. So let me answer that this way. The first two security directives that came from TSA were sealed, so they were not available publicly. So I wouldn't want to speak to that. I think that industry has followed best practices amongst the whole maturity chain of bringing security to every facet of industry. The topic that we talked about earlier with supply chain is probably the area that needs the remaining most support. And I don't think that's unique to us, but I think I just leave it at that in terms of an answer. Do you want to probe any further than that, or?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, I guess I don't know exactly what you just said to answer my question.
Yeah, that's what we do in Washington. I don't know that there's, I know that I would say like, oh, everyone's working on access management right now. I don't think I could say that because I don't think that's true. And I don't know that there's any one particular, like, this part of security was where everyone's focusing. If we had to do that, looking at the tools that you're investing in that someone else's tool, it's certainly cloud computing resources, that's a significant concern for folks because you have limited visibility into what exactly that other party's security capabilities are. That's probably where most energy is being focused right now. The thing I alluded to also was there have been some companies that have very much had an interest in moving their industrial control systems to a cloud-based provider. And that comes with a lot of risks associated with it, and it's caused people to ask a lot more questions about cloud providers in general. So how do you secure this? Can you tell us more? Most companies that you want to engage with give you very limited information about what their real security practices are. So that's probably where the majority of time and effort's been spent, I'd say within the last year. That and arm wrestling with TSA. Is that a better answer?
Yes, thank you.
Not perfect, but better. Better is the best we're going to get. So we want to come up here. Lorenzo?
So my question is, I work with a lot of the water infrastructure, and what I'm finding is that the systems, for example, SCADA systems, these systems are not prepared to be on the internet. So how do we work with the vendors or the companies in charge of these industrial control systems to ensure that they bring them up to, today's standards, so we can not have to worry about them being exposed to the internet?
So we've had some conversations with that too, and many of the devices and systems and tools that have been put in place by utility companies have been put in place with the thought that they were going to last for decades. Whether that's pipes in the ground or whatever it is. And to some people's ears today that sounds ridiculous, but if you think about it, in many cases that was achievable at one time. Many of those tools the vendors have not spent as much time addressing. One thing that we have done at times for our industry is we've identified some of those partners and brought them into a meeting and had a discussion with them about, well, here's your tool, it leaves a little bit lackluster, and we've seen some nominal uptake on making some improvements. That's something that the water industry could do as well. If there are specific vendors, bring them into a meeting with a variety of water companies and say, listen, you got to work on this. And if you have the power of, we want to continue using your product, but if it doesn't meet certain steps, help us here, you can't do that. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, when I talk to a lot of the water operators, the response that we get is, because I do bring things like that up to them, the response is, how do you take, that costs money. And in the infrastructure industries, trying to change those control systems, those industrial control systems, is an extensive amount of work, an extensive amount of money. And so they're saying, we want to change, but we can't because it's too extensive and too costly. So what we've been doing is asking the water infrastructure industry to, if at all possible, do not put your industrial control systems accessible to the internet until some of these vendors and software providers or partners start bringing their systems, up to today's standards.
Right. So there are other mitigating factors here. So if you have control systems that are problematic, there have been companies in the past that have simply just connected something to the internet and boom, it's there without anything at all in between. A basic firewall between a device and the internet provides at least some barrier. Now that tool I was talking about earlier called Shodan, what it looks for is the known communications patterns of ICS devices. And you can demonstrate in looking at it that some are directly connected to the internet without any firewall or anything in between at all. That's one answer until the products can get brought up to a standard where they're more secure in and of themselves. And I would even argue that if you have a secure industrial control system, I wouldn't connect that directly to the internet. I'd be connecting it between something else to the internet. So I don't know, does that answer or help answer the question?
And then I have just one last question. I deal with infrastructure, and so obviously I'm going to ask you more. What do you feel the federal government, the state government, and the local governments can do to start working together better? What do you think that can be done differently than what we're doing now to get all those three different entities oversight areas starting to work together better so we can provide a better defense to the threat actor business models that are occurring out there. The threat actors, this is an actual business model to them anymore. Back in the old days, it was kind of lots of kids dabbling around. It wasn't as mature, but now today, it's more of an actual business model that's out there that is actively going after our infrastructure.
So do I have everyone's agreement that I'm not getting in trouble with my answer here? I've sat in meetings, I've told you before, with different agencies and with agencies within agencies. My greatest experience is with the federal government. And what I have seen in the last 10 years is duplication of efforts, groups that don't talk to each other, and I would go so far as to say significant, no, I won't go that far, because I'm not sure who's online, but just a lot of money spent on things multiple times. So as a taxpayer, on a personal level, I find it disappointing. Getting federal government departments within agencies and different agencies to work together, there's some of that happens. There's always, it could be done more and it could be done better. If I want to be charitable, I would say, and I alluded to this earlier, there's a lot of turnover in these groups. So because of the churn of employees, and there's lots of employees, sometimes it's just hard to get traction on people talking to the right people about things. If you go from federal down to state and then to local, it just becomes even more complicated. I'm trying to think if I have real good answers for you. I'll keep talking until I think of something. I will say this. So I've had the opportunity to be briefed in Washington at a number of different levels about threats that exist. I've also traveled to different states and been briefed at what we call fusion centers. So a fusion center, most states have one or more in a particular locality where law enforcement, local, say DHS and other folks, sometimes Coast Guard and others, will come together and analyze cyber threats and physical threats for that area. I would say that one of the best briefings I have had in the last 10 years was conducted at the Kansas Fusion Center probably 4 years ago, better than most of the ones I've had in DC. Why there's isn't better coordination between states and localities and the federal government, I don't know. And how to get there, I don't think it's possible. I just don't think it's possible. I think improvements probably could be made, but those organizations are so large and they're out of control. That's just my opinion. So that's probably not what you wanted to hear. That's my experience. So then you got to stop me here if I get fired for that. You know, someone needs to hire me.
Sorry.
That's all right. I'm just being honest. That said, I've met and worked with many very solid people in the government at all levels, but it's just I find it disappointing often looking at the totality of it. We have a question over here.
Given the expanse and the distance between, it's kind of like the border. You can't really secure any one spot, and sometimes you go over the top and you harden the infrastructure. You put up cameras, you put up the barbed wire fence. Meanwhile, there's a manhole cover outside the building that gives access to the building. Some of these tabletop exercises expose ignorance and bureaucratical BS. I think is what you were, to put it nicely,
right,
is oftentimes the scenario. But I know. I'm an InfraGard member. I'm assuming there's more people in here that are as well. But a lot of times, like just locally here, Saylorville Reservoir, they recently found out that the overflow reservoir was on commercial power. There is no hydropower. There was no backup generator. It's the simple, stupid, overlooked stuff that can cause the most danger. Is there, obviously there's information share going on, but and people are not as close-chested as they once were about the information. They're willing to share it. Between SCADA and all the different security controls, and even in gas, I'm assuming there's high pressure and low pressure. There's all these detections and warnings. What are you doing about the rural area? I guess is obviously it's complex and there's no easy answer. But is it getting better? I guess do you feel that it's getting better?
Is what getting better?
The communication and the keep it simple, stupid mentality to harden things that really need the attention.
So to specifically answer that, I'll do better at giving a good answer. When we do exercises, that's when the weaknesses in communication really surface. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've been as attentive as we have been to participate in exercises, because it helps us to know who we should be talking to that we aren't. And I think that's helped a lot. And I wouldn't say that it's perfect now, because rarely does an exercise go by that something doesn't surface that needs to be worked on. But it's a lot of the obvious things that surfaced a few years ago have been addressed. Now it's the far less obvious ones.
Test. We're actually at time, unfortunately, but Jim will be around if you guys have any other questions for him, and he is going to be sitting on our panel at 4 o'clock. So thank you, Jim Linn.
Thanks. Thank you.